Hello, dear listeners. Before we begin today's story, take a moment to tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching or listening to us? We love knowing how far our stories travel and where our community is listening from. Now get comfortable, relax, and let yourself be immersed in this love story. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. It was a deafening, suffocating quiet that pressed in on Grace Barnes, heavier than the weight of her satin and lace wedding gown. She stood as a vision of bridal hope, a masterpiece of careful preparation, reflected in a floor-to-ceiling mirror. But her gaze was fixed on the ornate clock on the wall. 3:30. The ceremony was supposed to have started 30 minutes ago. The luxurious bridal suite, once a hive of joyful chaos, had become a waiting room for a verdict she didn't want to hear. Her mother would sweep in, her smile stretched painfully tight, and murmur something about traffic. Her best friend would follow, fluffing her veil and chattering about anything and everything, her eyes betraying a frantic anxiety. They came and went in waves of forced cheerfulness, their whispers growing more anxious in the hallway with each passing minute. Theodore, her fiancé, wasn't answering his phone. A cold, sharp tendril of panic began to curl in Grace's stomach. This wasn't like him. Theodore was meticulous, punctual, a man who lived by schedules and plans. 2 years of engagement, 2 years of his confident assurances and steady presence, and now, nothing. Just this terrible, echoing silence. The door to the suite opened abruptly, the sound making her jump. Her heart leapt with a desperate, foolish hope. But it wasn't Theodore. It was Sebastian Ashford, her boss. He stood framed in the doorway, a stark, imposing figure. His fiery red hair seemed to burn against the pallor of his skin, and his blue eyes, usually so cool and distant in the boardroom, were dark, with an urgent, somber expression she had never seen. He looked at her, taking in the entire bridal scene with a single, sweeping glance, and his jaw tightened. "I need to speak with Grace," he said to her parents, his voice low but carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Alone. Confused, her parents hesitated, but a look from Sebastian had them backing out of the room, closing the door softly behind them. The silence returned, but now it was different. It was charged, heavy with impending doom. He didn't waste time. He walked to the center of the room, his steps measured, deliberate. "Grace," he began, his voice a forced, unnatural calm. "Theodore isn't coming." The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. Grace's breath caught in her throat. He was detained an hour ago on his way here. Sebastian's explanation was succinct, brutal, and delivered with the precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. He laid out the devastating truth. Theodore was a corporate spy. His firm had been under investigation for months, and he was a key player. The engagement, the wedding, their entire 2-year relationship, it had all been a meticulously crafted lie, a long con to get close to her, to gain access to the sensitive financial data she managed as a trusted accountant for Fairmont Enterprises. The world didn't just tilt, it shattered. The floor seemed to drop away from beneath her feet. The beautiful dress, a symbol of her love and future, suddenly felt like a cruel, suffocating costume. The pain was a white-hot agony, but it wasn't the sting of abandonment. It was the deep, soul-shattering poison of betrayal. He hadn't just left her. He had never been there at all. A low, wounded sound escaped her lips, and she sank into a nearby armchair, the voluminous skirt of her gown pooling around her like a shroud. "The guests," she whispered, the words broken, her mind seizing on the next wave of horror. Hundreds of people, friends and family who had traveled from all over the country, were waiting downstairs. The humiliation of facing them, of their pitying stares, was a fresh nightmare. Sebastian watched her, his expression hardening into a mask of cold, protective fury. He was a man who hated disorder, but what he hated more, she was about to discover, was cruelty. He crossed the room and did the last thing she ever would have expected. He knelt before her. The powerful CEO, the man whose presence commanded entire boardrooms, was on one knee on the plush carpet, his gaze level with hers. "Grace," he said, his voice soft but intense. "Most of your guests have never met Theodore up close. They flew here from all over the country to see you happy. They don't need to know about this betrayal. They don't need to know that your heart has been broken today." She stared at him, her mind unable to process his words. A fog of pain and confusion clouded her thoughts. What are you saying?" He took a deep breath, his piercing blue eyes holding hers, pinning her in place. He was about to offer her a lifeline, one so insane, so unthinkable, it defied all logic. "Pretend I'm your fiancé," he said, the words a low, steady anchor in her swirling chaos. "Just for today, so you don't have to face this humiliation, so you can walk out of this room with your head held high." A hysterical laugh almost bubbled up in her throat. "But they'll know," she stammered. "You're my boss. People from the office are here." "They don't know me," he interrupted, his voice a tender, compelling whisper that cut through her panic. "And I will not let that man destroy you." He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, a towering figure of unexpected chivalry. He extended his hand to her. It was a gesture of offering, not command. A choice. "Are you ready?" he asked, his conviction so absolute, so powerful, that for a wild, fleeting moment it almost made her believe. Grace stared at his outstretched hand. It was a strong, capable hand, one she had only ever seen signing documents or gesturing decisively in meetings. Now it was offered to her as a lifeline in the wreckage of her life. For a moment, that stretched into an eternity, she was frozen, caught between the crushing reality of her betrayal and the sheer insanity of his proposal. Then, with a trembling breath that felt like her last ounce of strength, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, his grip firm and impossibly steady. It was an anchor. In a trance, she allowed him to pull her to her feet. The door opened to reveal her parents' shocked and worried faces. Before they could speak, Sebastian stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Grace, a subtle human shield. "Trust me," he said, his voice low and commanding, yet imbued with a strange reassurance. "I am protecting her." Her parents, stunned into silence by the force of his conviction, simply nodded, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. The walk down the long corridor to the ceremony hall was the longest of Grace's life. Each step felt both impossibly heavy and strangely disconnected from her body. The only thing that felt real was the steady pressure of Sebastian's hand holding hers. He leaned in, his voice a private whisper meant only for her. "Just look at me, Grace," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "No one else in that room matters. Just me." When the grand doors opened, a sea of faces turned toward them. A collective, confused murmur rippled through the crowd. But Sebastian didn't flinch. He held his head high, his expression calm and resolute, and led her down the aisle. Grace did as he said. She kept her eyes fixed on him, on the startling blue of his eyes, on the determined set of his jaw. He was her focal point, her North Star in a galaxy of chaos. They stood before the officiant, hand in hand. When it came time for the vows, Sebastian spoke without hesitation, his voice ringing with a sincerity that was utterly convincing. But Grace heard the true meaning behind his words. They were not for the audience. They were for her. "I promise," he said, his gaze locked on hers, "to be your harbor in times of storm, to honor the strength and kindness I have seen in you from the very first day, and to fiercely protect the heart you so generously share with the world." Each word was a carefully chosen balm for her shattered spirit, a coded message of support that no one else in the room could decipher. Then came the moment she had been dreading. "You may now kiss the bride." A visible tremor ran through Grace's body, Her breath hitched. This was too much. This was the point where the illusion would shatter. Sebastian saw the panic flash in her eyes. He saw her fear. He moved with an infinite gentleness. He raised his free hand, his fingers cool against her cheek, tilting her face up toward his. His eyes, so close now, were not filled with the fire of a lover, but with a quiet, profound promise of safety. "It's okay. I've got you." He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated protection. It was chaste, impossibly soft, and deeply respectful. It was a whisper of contact, a gesture meant to shield her, not claim her. Yet it lasted a fraction of a second longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of their pact. In that brief, suspended moment, she felt not the sting of a lie, but the profound comfort of his unwavering shield. When he pulled away, the crowd erupted in applause, oblivious. In the chaotic blur of congratulations that followed, Sebastian never left her side. His hand remained a constant warm presence on the small of her back. As soon as he found an opening, he guided her away from the throng of well-wishers, toward a quiet side exit. "The hardest part is over," he whispered, his voice a low rumble of relief near her ear. He led her toward a sleek black car waiting at the curb. He opened the door for her, and as she slid inside, he leaned in and said, "Now, let's go home." The word hung in the air between them. Home. It was a word that had been stolen from her just hours ago, a concept that had been shattered. Yet coming from his lips, it sounded less like a destination and more like a promise. A strange, terrifying, and incredibly welcome promise of sanctuary. The car moved with a silent, predatory grace, gliding through a set of imposing wrought iron gates that opened as if by magic. Grace stared out the window as they proceeded down a long, winding driveway flanked by ancient oak trees and gardens, so perfectly manicured they didn't look real. The driveway culminated in a circular court before a magnificent stone mansion, a structure of elegant lines and vast, dark windows that seemed to watch their approach. It was less a house and more a monument to power and success. A wave of intimidation, cold and sharp, washed over her. She felt small, out of place, a fraud in her borrowed dress, about to step into a world she didn't belong in. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, lost in the opulent leather interior of the car. Sebastian brought the car to a smooth stop. He didn't answer immediately. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence was profound. He turned to face her, his expression serious, but the hardness in his eyes had been replaced by something softer, something gentle. "My home," he said simply, "and where you will be staying for a while." He led her up the stone steps and through a massive front door into a grand foyer. The interior was not the cold, sterile space she had imagined. It was minimalist and elegant, yes, but there was a warmth to it. The floors were dark wood. The walls were adorned with large, abstract paintings that pulsed with color, and a grand, sweeping staircase curved upwards into the shadows. It was beautiful, but its sheer scale was overwhelming. He guided her into a spacious living area, gesturing toward a plush sofa. He remained standing, giving her space, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Grace," he began, his voice calm and measured, the sound a steadying presence in the vast room. "I know your head is spinning, but we need to be practical." He paused, choosing his words with the same care he used to dissect a business contract. "The news of Theodore's arrest is already on every financial news portal. Your name, unfortunately, is connected to his. Going back to your apartment right now would be an open invitation for reporters and the morbidly curious. And the office?" He hesitated, his gaze softening with empathy. "People can be cruel. The whispers, the stares. You don't deserve to endure that. Not now." The thought of facing her colleagues, of seeing their pity and suspicion, made Grace's stomach clench. The shame she had been holding at bay threatened to drown her. A hot flush crept up her neck, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. Sebastian saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way she shrank into herself. He continued, his voice gentle, offering not just a solution, but a shield. "I have a proposal," he said, "and it's one that would be an immense help to me. My personal schedule is chaotic. I need someone I can trust implicitly to organize my life here at the mansion, to coordinate my calendar, to act as a gatekeeper. Someone with your discretion and your efficiency." He held her gaze, his blue eyes clear and direct. "I want you to work for me, Grace. Here, as my personal executive assistant. You can continue your accounting duties remotely, in complete privacy. No one from the office needs to know where you are, only that you are working from home for the time being." The offer settled in the quiet room, and Grace saw it for what it was, an act of profound, almost breathtaking kindness. He wasn't offering her charity, which her pride would have forced her to refuse. He was offering her a purpose, a role, a reason to get up in the morning. He was giving her a way to maintain her dignity, to earn her keep, all while protecting her from the cruel judgment of the outside world. He was saving her, but he was masterfully framing it as if she were the one doing him a favor. Tears, hot and thick, welled in her eyes. But for the first time that day, they were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming, heart-wrenching gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I accept." A small, sad smile touched his lips. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but it softened the stern lines of his face. "In that case," he said softly, "I think we can dispense with the formalities. Please, Grace, call me Sebastian." Grace awoke to the gentle touch of morning light filtering through the sheer curtains of a vast window. For a single blissful moment, she was adrift in the soft, high thread count sheets, with no memory of where she was. The illusion shattered the instant her gaze fell upon her own hand resting on the pillow. A simple, unfamiliar gold band encircled her fourth finger. The ring, the wedding, the lie. The reality of the previous day crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. The hollow ache of betrayal, the sharp sting of humiliation, and beneath it all, a strange and confusing sense of safety. She was in Sebastian Ashford's house, his wife, in name only. She closed her eyes, a wave of dizziness washing over her. With a deep, steadying breath, she forced herself out of the luxurious bed. She dressed in a simple pair of trousers and a sweater she found in the suitcase her parents had discreetly sent over last night. Each movement felt heavy, uncertain. She made her way down the grand, curving staircase, her soft footsteps swallowed by the immense silence of the mansion. The place felt less like a home and more like a museum before opening hours. Intimidated, she followed the distant, welcoming aroma of fresh coffee. It led her to a state-of-the-art kitchen, where a kindly older woman with a warm smile was arranging a platter of fruit. "Good morning, dear," the woman said, her voice gentle. "You must be Grace. I'm Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Mr. Ashford asked me to make sure you found everything you need." She gestured to a freshly brewed pot of coffee. "He said you like yours with a dash of cinnamon." The word stopped Grace in her tracks. Cinnamon. It was such a small, trivial detail. A preference she'd never mentioned, but that he must have observed on the rare occasions she'd brought her own mug to a morning meeting. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was something far more potent, an act of quiet, unnoticed observation. It was proof that long before yesterday's chaos, he had seen her. A warmth spread through her chest, a tiny flicker of light in the vast darkness of her grief. Later she found her way to the home office, a beautiful light-filled room lined with books. Sebastian was already there, seated behind a large oak desk, a laptop open before him. He looked up as she entered, and his intense blue eyes immediately fell to her left hand, where she was nervously twisting the gold band on her finger. "You can take that off if you want, Grace," he said, his voice neutral. "The performance is over." She looked down at the ring. It felt heavy, a symbol of a lie. But it was also a symbol of his protection, of the hand he had reached out to her in her darkest moment. Taking it off felt like severing that fragile connection. With a calmness that surprised even herself, she met his gaze. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'd like to keep it on. For now." He raised a single auburn eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "It's a reminder," she explained, the words coming to her with a sudden, clear certainty. "Not of the lie, but a reminder that on the worst day of my life, a good man offered me his hand." Her simple, honest sincerity seemed to catch him off guard. The professional mask he wore softened, and a deep, profound respect dawned in his eyes. He saw not a victim, not a fragile employee, but a woman of quiet, unbreakable strength. For the first time since she had known him, a small, genuine smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "As you wish," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur that sealed a new, unspoken pact between them. "Mrs. Ashford." The first few days in the mansion passed in a blur of quiet efficiency. Grace threw herself into her new role, organizing Sebastian's chaotic schedule with a focus that bordered on obsessive. It was a welcome distraction, a set of neat, orderly tasks that stood in stark contrast to the tangled mess of her own emotions. She created color-coded calendars, streamlined his correspondence, and managed his household staff, all from the quiet sanctuary of the home office. It was a fragile peace, but it was peace nonetheless. That peace was shattered on a Thursday afternoon. She was sorting through Sebastian's secondary email inbox, a task he'd assigned to her to filter out non-essential communications, when a subject line made her blood run cold. "Internal report, Project Nightingale, Theodore Vance investigation." Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was clearly a misdirected email meant for the board's security committee. Her first instinct was to delete it, to pretend she had never seen it. But a darker, more morbid curiosity took hold. She needed to know. She needed to understand the full scope of the lie that had been her life. With a trembling hand, she clicked it open. The report was a clinical, brutal dissection of Theodore's treachery. It contained transcripts of intercepted messages, timelines of his deceit, and detailed accounts of his manipulation. She read his words, his private communications with his real employers. He referred to her as the asset, the sweet, naive accountant. He mocked her quiet nature, her trust, her love. He detailed his plan to marry her, to gain her complete confidence, and then to exploit it for corporate espionage. "She's completely devoted," one of his messages read. "Another month after the wedding, and she'll be eating out of the palm of my hand. She'll give me anything I ask for." Each word was a fresh stab to her already wounded heart. The man she had loved, the man she had planned to spend her life with, had seen her as nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating wave that made it hard to breathe. Silent tears began to stream down her face, dripping onto the cold, unforgiving screen of the tablet. She didn't hear him enter the office. "Grace?" Sebastian's voice, sharp with concern, cut through the fog of her pain. She looked up, her vision blurred by tears. He was standing in the doorway, his jacket off, his tie loosened. He took in the sight of her, her pale face, the tablet in her shaking hands, and he understood instantly. A cold, dangerous fury settled over his features. His blue eyes turned to chips of ice. He strode across the room, his movements swift and decisive. He didn't say a word. He simply took the tablet from her hands, his fingers brushing hers, and closed the device with a soft, final click. He placed it on a high shelf, far out of her reach, as if quarantining a toxic substance. Then, he pulled a chair from across the room and sat down directly in front of her, so their knees were almost touching. He didn't try to hug her. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply met her tear-filled gaze, his own eyes filled with a fierce, protective anger on her behalf. "He does not define you, Grace," he said, his voice low and steady, a rock in her turbulent sea of pain. "His corruption does not tarnish your integrity. The kindness he saw as a weakness, it is your greatest strength. Do you understand me?" She could only manage a choked, broken sob in response. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just sat there, a silent, solid presence, witnessing her grief without judgment, without trying to fix it. "Cry," he said softly, his voice a command, but a gentle one. "Let it out. All of it." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." And in the quiet, sunlit office, his steadfast, respectful presence was more comforting than any embrace, more healing than any words of solace could ever be. He was simply there, sharing the weight of her pain, and it was enough. The following day, a heavy apathy settled over Grace like a shroud. The storm of her tears had passed, leaving behind a desolate, empty landscape. The raw pain of the betrayal had numbed into a dull, persistent ache that stole her appetite and her energy. She moved through the motions of her work, but her usual quiet light was gone, extinguished. She sat at her desk, staring blankly at the screen, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. Sebastian watched her from a distance, his concern a palpable, coiled thing. He saw the way she pushed food around her plate at lunch, the dark, hollow circles under her eyes. He saw her spirit, the one he had sworn to protect, fading. He knew that words and quiet presence were no longer enough. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long, melancholic shadows across the manicured lawns, he knocked softly on her bedroom door. She opened it to find him standing there, his expression gentle but firm. "Get a warm jacket," he said, not a request, but a soft command. "We're going out." "Sebastian, I don't feel like it," she began, her voice flat and tired. "I'm fine, really." "I know you're not," he countered, his blue eyes leaving no room for argument. "And that's okay, but you're not staying here tonight. Please, Grace." Reluctantly, she agreed. She expected him to take her to some fancy Michelin-starred restaurant, a place designed to distract and impress. Instead, he drove in the opposite direction of the city, climbing a winding road that led up into the hills. They arrived at a small, secluded observatory, perched on a peak that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering city below. The air was cool, crisp, and blessedly silent. They stood side by side at the railing, the vast, star-dusted sky arching above them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was a comfortable silence, a shared moment of peace far removed from the world that had hurt her. "When my father died," Sebastian said finally, his voice a low, quiet murmur that seemed to blend with the night. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the distant constellations. "I felt lost, adrift. The company, the responsibilities, it all felt meaningless. A friend of my father's, an old wise man, told me to find the most constant thing I knew and hold on to it." He paused, a sad, reflective smile touching his lips. "So I came up here. I looked at the stars. They're always there, Grace. Even during the day, when the sun is so bright we can't see them. They don't go away." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes shimmering in the faint starlight. "Your goodness is like that," he said, his voice soft but intense. "It's constant. It's who you are, down to your very core. Don't let one man's darkness make you forget your own light. Don't let him convince you it isn't there just because he was too blind to see it." His vulnerability was a gift. He wasn't just trying to comfort her. He was sharing a piece of his own past, his own pain, to create a bridge to hers. He was treating her not as a fragile thing to be fixed, but as an equal who could understand the language of loss, A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this one was different. It was a tear of gratitude, of connection. The heavy weight on her chest seemed to lift, just slightly. "Thank you, Sebastian," she whispered, the words carrying more meaning than he could possibly know. Under the vast, silent canopy of the night sky, she didn't feel like his employee. She didn't feel like a victim he had rescued. For the first time, she felt like she was standing beside a man who saw all of her pain, her strength, her light, and was not afraid. A few afternoons later, seeking a moment of peace, Grace found herself wandering through a part of the estate's vast gardens she hadn't yet explored. Her steps led her to a tall, ivy-covered wall where a weathered wooden door was tucked almost invisibly amongst the leaves. A faint warmth emanated from it. Piqued by a quiet curiosity, she pushed it open and stepped inside. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She had entered a hidden sanctuary. It was a large, glass-paned greenhouse, but instead of being filled with flowers, it was a forest in miniature. Dozens of bonsai trees, each a perfect, tiny work of art, were arranged on tiered wooden benches. The air was warm, still, and smelled of damp earth and pine. It was a world of profound peace and patience. In the center of the room, his back to her, stood Sebastian. He was not the formidable CEO she knew. He wore a simple, soft cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms. He was hunched over a small, delicate tree, his focus absolute, his large hands moving with a surprising artistic grace as he used a tiny pair of shears to snip a single minuscule branch. He was so completely absorbed in his task that he didn't hear her enter. Grace watched him for a long, silent moment, mesmerized. She was seeing a side of him that she was certain no one else in the world was ever permitted to witness. This was not Sebastian Ashford, the titan of industry. This was just Sebastian. He finally straightened up, stretching his back, and turned. He froze when he saw her standing there, and a dark, handsome blush crept up his neck, coloring the tips of his ears. He looked like a boy caught in his secret hideout, a flash of genuine embarrassment in his eyes. "Grace," he stammered, his usual composure gone. I didn't hear you come in." "I'm sorry to intrude," she said softly, but she didn't move to leave. "No, it's fine," he admitted, running a hand through his fiery hair. "This is just my refuge. The art of bonsai. It requires patience, care. It helps me slow the world down." Instead of feeling like an intruder, Grace felt a pull toward this secret world of his. She offered him a small, gentle smile. "It's beautiful. May I see?" Her genuine interest seemed to put him at ease. The tension left his shoulders, replaced by a quiet pride. "Of course." He began to walk her through his collection, his voice losing its corporate edge and taking on the warm, quiet passion of a true enthusiast. He showed her a gnarled juniper, its trunk twisted and scarred. "This one taught me about resilience," he said. He gestured to a vibrant maple, its leaves a fiery crimson. "And this one, about how change can be beautiful." He was sharing more than a hobby. He was sharing the quiet, philosophical lessons he had learned far from the noise of the boardroom. He was showing her pieces of his soul, and Grace listened, utterly captivated, the last image of the powerful, intimidating CEO dissolving completely. He led her to the heart of the greenhouse, to a workbench where a single delicate cherry blossom bonsai stood. It was not yet in bloom, its slender branches bare. "This one is my favorite," he said, his voice dropping to a tone of near reverence. "It's a reminder that beauty can be incredibly strong, but also fleeting. Its blossoms, they're perfect, but they only last for a short time." He paused, turning to look at her. His blue eyes, intense and serious, met hers. "It teaches us to value the precious moments," he continued softly, "to protect them." The air grew thick. The temperature in the greenhouse seemed to rise. It was clear to both of them that he was no longer talking about the tree. He was talking about the quiet, fragile moment they were sharing. He was talking about her. Grace's heart began to beat a little faster. She wanted to be a part of this world, this secret, gentle side of him. Can I try?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. A slow, genuine smile, the first she had ever truly seen from him, illuminated his entire face. Of course. He picked up a small, elegant pair of pruning shears and moved to stand behind her. His presence was a sudden, encompassing warmth at her back. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the faint, clean scent of his shirt mixed with the earthy aroma of the greenhouse. "You have to feel for the right branch," he whispered, his voice a low vibration right next to her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. He reached around her, his large hand covering hers, guiding it toward a small, errant twig on the cherry tree. His fingers laced with hers over the cool metal of the shears. His hand was so big, so warm, completely enveloping hers. Time seemed to stop. The world narrowed to the feeling of his chest against her back, the sound of their soft, shared breathing, the intoxicating intimacy of the moment. It was more intimate than any kiss could ever be. "Here," he murmured, his breath a warm caress against her temple. "Cut here." But neither of them moved. They remained frozen, caught in a perfect, fragile, and terrifying moment of connection, both of them afraid that the slightest movement, even the snip of the shears, would shatter the spell. The fragile peace of their shared world in the greenhouse carried over into the following days. A new, unspoken understanding existed between them. The lines of employer and employee had blurred into something warmer, more personal. Grace found herself smiling more, the heavy shroud of her grief beginning to lift, replaced by a tentative, fluttering hope. The real world, however, had not forgotten them. On Tuesday morning, Sebastian had a scheduled video conference with several key members of the board. Grace sat discreetly to the side of his desk in the home office, taking notes as she always did. The meeting was progressing smoothly until a board member named Mr. Davies, a notoriously abrasive man known for his sharp tongue, joined the call. After a brief, perfunctory discussion about quarterly earnings, Davies leaned into his camera, a smug, unpleasant smirk on his face. "On another note, Ashford," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "I heard you finally tied the knot, and with the girl from accounting, of all people." He chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Let's just hope she's better at counting your assets than she was at choosing her last fiancé." The words, spoken so casually, so cruelly, struck Grace like a physical blow. The air was knocked from her lungs. A hot, searing wave of humiliation washed over her, so intense it made her dizzy. She felt the blood drain from her face, only to rush back in a burning flush. Her eyes immediately filled with tears, and she dropped her gaze to her lap, praying for the floor to swallow her whole. She could feel the curious, pitying stares of the other board members through the screen. Across the desk, Sebastian went perfectly still. If Grace had dared to look up, she would have seen a transformation so swift and so total, it was terrifying. The calm, composed CEO vanished. In his place was a man whose face had become a mask of pure glacial ice. His blue eyes, moments ago cool and professional, now blazed with a fire so cold it could burn. He raised a hand, a sharp, cutting gesture that silenced Davies mid-chuckle. "My wife, Mr. Davies," Sebastian said, his voice dangerously low, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of ice, "is the most loyal and integral employee this company has ever had. It was her unwavering decency that saved this firm from a potential disaster of your own making, I might add, since you were the one who recommended Theodore Vance's firm in the first place." A stunned silence fell over the virtual meeting room. Davies's smug expression faltered, replaced by a look of shocked disbelief. Sebastian leaned forward, his eyes boring into the camera, his voice dropping even lower, laced with an unmistakable threat. "Her character is beyond reproach. If you or anyone else on this board ever dares to question it again, I will not consider it a corporate matter. I will consider it a personal offense against me and against my family." He didn't wait for a response. He reached forward and ended the call, plunging the office into an abrupt, ringing silence. Grace sat frozen, her head still bowed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't breathe. He hadn't just defended her. He had lauded her. He had called her his wife, his family. He had risked a major conflict with a powerful board member, all to shield her from a cruel remark. Slowly she lifted her head and looked at him. He was staring at her, the icy fury in his eyes melting away, replaced by a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. In that moment, the sham of their wedding, the lie they had constructed out of desperation, felt like the most solid, unshakable truth in the entire world. That evening, the mansion was quiet. The confrontation with the board had left a strange, vibrating tension in the air. Unable to settle, Grace wandered through the silent house, her thoughts a tangled mess. The memory of Sebastian's fierce defense played over and over in her mind, each word a testament to a loyalty she had never expected. She stepped out onto the sprawling stone terrace. Below, the swimming pool glowed with a soft, ethereal blue light, its surface a placid mirror reflecting the star-dusted sky. Beside it, sitting on the edge of a lounge chair, was Sebastian. He wasn't swimming. He was just sitting there, staring into the illuminated water, his shoulders slumped, looking utterly alone and lost in thought. She hesitated, feeling like she was intruding on a private moment. But the need to acknowledge what he had done for her was a stronger pull. She walked down the steps, her soft footsteps barely making a sound on the cool stone. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, stopping a few feet away, "for what you did today. In the meeting." He shook his head, his gaze returning to the water. "I did nothing but speak the truth, Grace." He paused, then added, his voice a low murmur. "What I said on that call, about you being the most loyal employee, it wasn't just for show. I noticed that about you years ago. I always admired your discretion, your work ethic, your quiet integrity." He let out a short, self-deprecating sigh. "I just never found the right way to tell you." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the gentle lapping of the water. The question that had been burning in her heart since her wedding day finally rose to the surface, demanding to be asked. "Why did you really help me, Sebastian?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "On that day, why did you do it?" He finally turned to look at her fully. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, but she could see the raw vulnerability in his blue eyes. The carefully constructed walls he kept around himself were gone, because the thought of someone using your goodness against you, of twisting your kind heart into a weapon to hurt you. His voice was a hoarse, ragged whisper. "It made me physically ill. The idea of you having to face that humiliation alone, of your spirit being crushed by his betrayal, it was unbearable." He stood up and took a step closer, the space between them shrinking, becoming charged with a new, potent energy. "It wasn't pity, Grace," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming thick with an emotion he could no longer hide. "It was instinct." He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "An instinct I feel every single time I'm near you," he confessed. "A need to protect, to shield, to be near your light." The confession hung in the warm night air, a breathtaking, terrifying admission. It was the answer to everything. It stripped away the pretense of their arrangement, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of his feelings. They stood there, on the edge of the glowing water, the whole world seeming to hold its breath around them. The world seemed to narrow to the charged space between them, The soft lapping of the water, the distant hum of the city, the vast, starry sky, it all faded away. There was only the intensity of his gaze, the raw honesty of his confession, and the frantic, hopeful beating of her own heart. Driven by the momentum of his own words, by an impulse that had been suppressed for far too long, Sebastian slowly lifted his hand. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his fingers hovering in the air just inches from her face, as if asking for a permission he wasn't sure he would receive. Then, with an infinite tenderness, he touched her. His fingertips, warm and slightly calloused, traced a gentle path along her jawline. It was a touch of reverence, of wonder. Her skin tingled where he made contact. She leaned into his hand, a silent, answering surrender. "I can't pretend anymore, Grace," he murmured, his voice a low, husky rasp that sent a shiver down her spine. "I can't pretend this is just about protecting you." He lowered his head, his movements slow, deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't move. She couldn't. She was caught in the powerful magnetic pull of his orbit, a force she had been fighting against for weeks. His lips met hers. The kiss was everything they had held back. It was the gratitude for her quiet strength and the admiration for his fierce protection. It was the shared loneliness of two isolated souls and the unexpected comfort they had found in each other. It was slow and deep and exploratory, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of salt water from her unshed tears and a profound, soul-deep relief. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. When he started to pull away, a soft, questioning sound escaped his lips. But before he could retreat, before doubt could poison the perfect, fragile moment, Grace acted on a pure, undeniable instinct of her own. Her hands, which had been resting hesitantly on his chest, slid up around his neck. She rose on her toes, and with a surge of feeling she could no longer contain, she deepened the kiss. This time it was different. It was not a gentle exploration. It was a declaration. It was all her pent-up grief, her gratitude, her burgeoning hope, and her terrifying, wonderful love pouring out in a single, desperate gesture. This was not him saving her anymore. This was two hearts, both broken in their own ways, finding their missing pieces in each other. They finally broke apart, breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. The air crackled with the aftershock of what had just happened. A flicker of fear, of reality, returned to Grace's eyes. The complexity of their situation came rushing back. He was her boss, her protector, her fake husband. What did this make them now? "Sebastian, she started, her voice a trembling whisper, ready to question, to doubt. He placed a single gentle finger on her lips, silencing her. "Shh," he murmured, his own voice unsteady. Don't say it's a mistake." He looked into her eyes, his own shining with a fierce, desperate sincerity. "Not when this feels like the only right thing I've done in my entire life." The morning after the kiss was shrouded in a new, suffocating tension. The comfortable silence they had built was gone, replaced by an awkward, charged quiet. Every accidental brush of hands, every shared glance across the breakfast table, was fraught with the memory of what had happened by the pool. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Grace was terrified. She avoided him, busying herself with tasks in the farthest corners of the mansion. Her heart was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. A part of her soared with a joy so pure and bright it was dizzying. But another, louder part was gripped by a cold, paralyzing fear. She had fallen in love with him. It was a truth she could no longer deny. But the foundation of that love felt treacherous, unstable. He was the man who had rescued her from the worst day of her life. He had given her a home when she had none, a purpose when she was lost. He was her employer, her protector, her savior. How could she possibly know if what she felt was real? Was it love? Or was it just a profound, overwhelming gratitude? Was her heart truly his? Or was it just clinging to the man who had so gallantly pieced it back together? The doubt was a poison, seeping into her newfound happiness, tainting it with fear. She couldn't bear the thought of being a burden to him, an obligation he felt bound to because of his own kindness. She needed to know that if he loved her, Grace, not the broken woman he had saved. And she needed to know that her own feelings were just as genuine. With a heavy, aching heart, she knew what she had to do. She had to leave the safety of his shadow to see if her own feelings could survive in the light. That afternoon, while he was out at a rare in-person meeting, she made her painful decision. She went to her room and packed a single bag with her essential belongings. Then she sat at the small, elegant desk and wrote a letter, the words blurring through her tears. "Sebastian," she wrote, "I will never be able to thank you enough for what you have done for me. You saved me in more ways than you know, but I cannot stay here any longer. I have fallen in love with you, and that feeling terrifies me. I need to know that it is real, that it is not just gratitude for your protection. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, away from this beautiful, safe world you have built around me, to find out who I am without you. Only then will I know if what I feel is true." With a trembling hand, she slid the fake wedding band from her finger. It felt cold and foreign now. She placed it on top of the folded letter on the perfectly made bed, a final, symbolic act of letting go. She took one last look around the beautiful room that had been her sanctuary, her heart breaking with every step. She picked up her bag, her resolve hardening. She turned to leave, and her heart stopped. Sebastian was standing in the doorway. His meeting must have ended early. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the single suitcase by her feet, then on the letter, and the glint of gold on her bed. The color drained from his face. The brief, hopeful smile he'd had when he entered vanished, replaced by a look of such profound, raw pain that it stole her breath. He finally lifted his eyes to meet hers. "You're leaving me, Grace?" he asked, his voice a low, broken whisper that shattered the silence of the room. "I'm not leaving you," she said, the words catching in her throat, tears streaming freely down her face now. "I'm leaving the idea of me that I'm afraid you've created. I'm leaving the fear that I'm not enough for you on my own, that I'll always just be the girl you saved." Her confession, so full of self-doubt and a desperate need for her own strength, hung in the air between them. He stared at her, the initial shock and pain in his eyes slowly being replaced by a dawning, heartbreaking understanding. He finally saw the true depth of her fear. With 2 long strides he crossed the room, closing the distance between them. He didn't reach for the letter. He didn't look at the ring. He reached for her. He took both of her hands in his grip firm, grounding. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice low and thick with an emotion so powerful it seemed to shake his entire frame. "Grace, look at me." He waited until her tear-filled eyes met his. "You were never the girl I saved," he said, his voice raw with sincerity. "From the moment you walked out of that bridal suite with your head held high, you were the woman who was saving me." He shook his head, a look of wonder on his face. "My life was gray. It was a series of obligations, of boardrooms and balance sheets, a hollow, empty routine. I was living, but I wasn't alive. And then you came into my life, with your quiet strength, your gentle heart, your incredible light. You brought color back into my world, Grace. You reminded me what it feels like to care about something, about someone, more than the company. You saved me from a life of loneliness I didn't even realize I was trapped in." He let go of one of her hands and reached for the small gold band on the bed. He held it in his palm, its metallic gleam a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. "This ring," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It started as a lie to protect your dignity, a shield. But what I feel for you, Grace, is the most profound and unshakable truth I have ever known." And then, right there, in the middle of the sunlit bedroom, with her suitcase packed by the door, he sank to one knee. He looked up at her, his piercing blue eyes shining with a desperate, hopeful love. "I don't want you to be my assistant. I don't want you to be my protégé," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you to be my partner, my confidant, my equal, my wife. For real this time." Seeing the fresh wave of shock and confusion on her face, he quickly stood up, still holding her hand, still holding the ring. "Don't answer me now," he said, his voice urgent. "I know you're scared. I know you have doubts. But please, don't go." He squeezed her hand, a gentle, pleading pressure. "Stay," he whispered. "Stay, and let me show you. Let me prove to you every single day that this is real, for both of us." He had laid his heart bare, offering not a cage of protection, but a partnership of equals. The choice was no longer about running or staying. It was about whether she was brave enough to believe in the truth he was showing her. It was about whether she was brave enough to choose love over fear. Grace stayed. She unpacked her bag in a daze, her heart a whirlwind of fear and soaring, terrifying hope. His plea, his raw vulnerability, had been a powerful counter-argument to her own doubts. She had to give him a chance. She had to give them a chance. The atmosphere in the mansion shifted. The tension of the morning dissolved, replaced by a fragile, tentative tenderness. They moved around each other with a new awareness, a shared understanding that they were standing on the precipice of something real and utterly unknown. That evening, as she was organizing some files in the office, he appeared in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his usual suit or even the casual clothes he wore around the house. He was dressed in a crisp, dark blue button-down shirt and tailored trousers. He looked nervous, hopeful, and impossibly handsome. "I'm taking you out," he announced, his voice a little too formal. "A proper first date. No lies, no charade, just us." He didn't take her to a place with white tablecloths and a wine list as thick as a novel. Instead, he drove them to a small, family-owned Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet side street in the city. It was a place she had mentioned in passing weeks ago, a favorite spot from before her life had been turned upside down. The fact that he had remembered, that he had chosen this place for her, was a quiet, powerful statement. The restaurant was cozy and loud, filled with the clatter of plates and boisterous conversation. It was a world away from the hushed, opulent spaces he usually inhabited. But Sebastian didn't seem to notice. His focus was entirely on her. Over plates of pasta and cheap, delicious red wine, they talked, really talked. Not as a boss and an assistant, not as a protector and a victim, but as two people getting to know each other. He asked about her childhood, her favorite books, her silliest fears. She, in turn, asked about his life before the immense responsibility of his father's company had fallen on his shoulders. She learned about the summer he'd spent backpacking through Europe, the terrible garage band he'd been in during college, the way his father had taught him to sail. He was not the intimidating CEO or the lonely man in the greenhouse. He was just Sebastian, funny and charming and surprisingly down to earth. And she was not the broken-hearted woman or the grateful employee. She was just Grace, witty and insightful and stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. At the end of the night, he walked her to the front door of the mansion. The air was cool, and the moon was a bright silver sliver in the sky. "I have something for you," he said, his voice a little hesitant. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, elegant black box. Grace's heart gave a nervous flutter. It was too soon for jewelry, too soon for grand gestures. But when she opened it, there was no glittering diamond inside. There was a single, silver key. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. "It's the key to the front door," he said softly, his gaze intense and sincere. "This house, it's not my refuge where you happen to be staying, Grace. I want it to be our home." He took a small step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "If you want it, of course." The gesture was so simple, yet so profound. He wasn't offering her a gift. He was offering her a place, an equal footing, a permanent spot in his life, with no strings attached, no expectations of gratitude. He was giving her the power to come and go as she pleased, trusting that she would choose to stay. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She closed her fingers around the cool, solid metal of the key. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I want that." 6 months melted away into a seamless rhythm of quiet, domestic happiness. The key Grace held in her hand that night had unlocked more than just a door. It had unlocked a life. The mansion, once an intimidating symbol of his world, had truly become their home, filled with the easy laughter and comfortable silences of a couple deeply in love. Grace had returned to the office, but not as the timid accountant who scurried past the executive suite. She walked the halls with a new, quiet confidence, her position as Sebastian's partner, in life and increasingly in spirit, an unspoken but respected truth. The whispers that had once followed her were replaced by nods of admiration. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sebastian told her he was taking her on a surprise outing. A strange, nervous energy buzzed around him, a stark contrast to his usual, unflappable calm. He drove for an hour, the scenery growing more familiar with every mile. Grace's heart began to beat a little faster when she realized where they were headed. He pulled up to the elegant, sprawling estate where her disastrous wedding was supposed to have taken place. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She hadn't been back here since that day. The place was a monument to her deepest humiliation. Sebastian must have sensed her tension, because he reached over and squeezed her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I know this place holds a bad memory, Grace," he said softly, his blue eyes full of understanding. "That's why we're here. We need to replace it with a good one." He led her not to the front entrance, but around the side of the building, through a path she had never taken. It opened into a secluded, walled garden she hadn't known existed. It was breathtaking. Strings of fairy lights were woven through the branches of the trees, casting a soft, magical glow over everything. The air was fragrant with the scent of roses and damp earth. In the center of the garden, a small table was set for two. It was here, in this private, enchanted space, that he turned to face her. The nervous energy he'd been carrying all day was now a look of profound, heartfelt sincerity. "Grace Barnes," he began, his voice thick with emotion. He took both of her hands in his. "The first time we stood on these grounds, I made you a promise born of desperation. I offered you a lie to protect you. Today, I want to offer you a truth to cherish for the rest of our lives." Slowly, deliberately, he knelt down on one knee. The gesture, so similar to the one he had made in the bridal suite, was now imbued with a completely different meaning. This was not an act of rescue. This was an act of pure, unadulterated love. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, and Grace gasped. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. It wasn't a traditional diamond. It was a stunning, deep blue sapphire, the exact color of his eyes, flanked by two smaller, glittering diamonds. "Grace," he said, his own eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You are the strongest, kindest, most resilient woman I have ever known. You walked through fire and came out shining brighter. You taught me how to live again, how to feel again. You are my constant, my harbor, my home." He looked up at her, his heart in his eyes. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" Tears of pure, overwhelming joy streamed down her face, but she was laughing. "Yes!" she cried, her voice a happy, choked sob. "Yes, of course, yes!" He slid the exquisite ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood up, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her with a passion and a love that sealed their future. "Now," he whispered against her lips, his forehead resting against hers, "now we have a happy memory for this place. 1 year to the day after their first fictitious wedding, Grace and Sebastian stood at an altar once more. This time, there were no crowds, no whispers, no lies. The ceremony was an intimate, heartfelt affair held in the sun-drenched garden of their own home, surrounded by a small circle of friends and family who had witnessed their unlikely love story unfold. Grace was radiant in a simple, elegant gown, her eyes shining with a joy so pure it was breathtaking. Sebastian stood beside her, his gaze fixed on her, a look of such profound love and adoration on his face that it moved many of their guests to tears. He was not playing a part. He was a man who had found his entire world standing next to him. Their vows were not the generic promises of a stranger, but a deeply personal tapestry woven from the threads of their unique journey. They spoke of finding truth in the midst of a lie, of strength in vulnerability, and of the quiet, unexpected ways they had saved each other. Later, at the reception, as the sun set and the fairy lights in the garden began to glow, a photographer approached them. "Could we get a shot of the happy couple? Maybe recreate that first kiss for the camera?" Grace and Sebastian looked at each other, a secret, knowing smile passing between them. Sebastian turned to Grace. He didn't pull her into a dramatic, passionate embrace for the camera. Instead, he gently cupped her face in his hands, just as he had done at that first false altar. He leaned in and gave her a kiss that was impossibly soft, achingly tender, and deeply respectful. It was a perfect echo of the first kiss he had ever given her, the kiss of pure protection. When he pulled away, he whispered, so only she could hear, "This one will always be my favorite." "Why?" she murmured, her heart swelling. "Because it was the moment I promised myself that I would spend the rest of my life taking care of you," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. Later in the evening, they stood together on the edge of the terrace, watching their friends and family dance under the stars. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady, rhythmic beat. "Who would have thought," she mused, her voice soft with wonder, "that the absolute worst day of my life would turn out to be the beginning of the very best part of it?" Sebastian wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. He pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the soft scent of her hair. "I knew," he answered, his voice a low, confident rumble against her ear. "I was just waiting for you to see it too." They stood there in the warm, gentle quiet, their shared past no longer a source of pain, but the strong, unlikely foundation of their beautiful future. Their story was a testament to the incredible truth that sometimes a single, desperate act of kindness can blossom into the most real and profound love of all.